Welcome, Traceable Designers. Today we're making the unique dual fabric wraparound straight style valance. This valance does feature two complementary fabrics adjoined together, and then you will make one single panel that fits your window from rod return to rod return. We're also going to make an adjustment for the rod pocket. We're going to be reducing the size to fit a 1-inch metal curtain rod. Today we'll be using the straight style valance design form from your cornice-style valance kit. To begin, hang your curtain rod and then measure from the wall side against the wall on the return from both sides to get your complete panel width measurement. Fabric sizing is done with a folded fabric section so that you can get a 50% mark, and that's where you're going to be adjusting your panel size for one full panel. I like to put the two pieces together so I can get an idea of the depth of the lower area, and of course we are adjusting the pocket, so we're using different sizing lines and we'll have to mark the fabric off. You are going to use a 1/2-inch strip of fusible backing to secure those two pieces together, and just make sure your fabric is very straight, cut with very straight edges. You also want to leave excess along the bottom, around the outside edges. So we're going to leave a little space on top because we're going to actually measure down, and then we're going to straighten out the pocket on the top. Make sure you like the placement from the 13.5-inch center panel top edge down. So I have a dark fabric on top and then a printed fabric on the bottom. Mine are about 8 and 6 inches. That's, of course, personal preference. So get that positioned and then size both pieces to prepare them to be fused together. We will be fusing the fabric together with the back side facing out, the right side facing down. I have a piece of 5/8-inch seam tape that I'm using, but you can cut a 1/2-inch strip roughly of the fusible backing and just secure that along the bottom. Just iron that along without overlapping onto your ironing board. Once it's cool, just peel back the paper to expose the glue, and then we'll be attaching the lower fabric right across that exposed glue. Make sure that's very, very straight, and then just use a dry iron with no steam to fuse those two fabric sections together to make one. Okay, once the fabric is fused together, again fold it in half, and we're going to measure up from the lower fabric so that we make sure it's nice and straight. I'm doing a 7-inch upper section, so then I'm going to add 3 more inches, making it 10 inches from the lower fabric, and mark across the top to make sure it's nice and straight. And then once that is in place, I'm going to cut the excess off across the top of the rod pocket area to make that a straight edge. Always mark from the lower section up to make sure it's straight across the rod. Otherwise, you could have had an uneven section on top. So now that that's straight, I'm measuring down 3 inches for my rod pocket, and that is where I'm positioning my heat and bond fusible backing, glue side down, and I'm just using a sweeping motion out toward the edges, making sure that that paper is positioned along my marks because the upper edge is my unlined rod pocket area. So make sure you get that fused down nice and solid, just with a sweeping motion from the inside out. Once the paper is 100% cooled, peel that back and reserve that. And then you're going to cut a piece of lining that is going to go around all the edges, covering the fabric and extending beyond the edges. Align that nice and straight across the top edge of the glue, fusing from the center out and down to get rid of any buckles. Make sure that gets 100% secured. And the reason you want a large piece is because if the lining would move or shift, you're actually covering the entire piece of fabric with the lining without any exposed glue from the backing. Once the lining is secure, fold your fabric section in half. Make sure to match up your print and your top edge of your lining. And then you'll measure over from your fold the 50% mark of the width of your panel. So if it's 44 inches that you need from wall to wall across the returns, you obviously do 22 inches. This is a very important mark because this will determine the full width of your panel, and you want it wide enough to butt up against the wall. So if you want to add a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch to it, you can always remove that excess after you've cut out your panel and before you attach your trim, just by simply repositioning the design form, tracing, and taking off that little shaved edge. So to line up your design form, you're going to position the center panel top edge along the top of your lining and position your right side of your design form along your sizing marks. Press your design form down, make sure that's nice and firm, and then just simply trace around the right side and end at the folded edge, and then add a little line on the upper section so you can see where to cut for your rod pocket area. To cut out your panel, turn the fabric section with the folded edge facing you. You can add additional pins if you'd like to help secure the fabric. I find it easier to cut from the folded side. When you're cutting out your valance, make sure your line is very straight and very even. So you'll cut across the bottom. You can press the fabric down as you cut along, taking your time to make sure it is straight. And then when you get to the corners, make sure those are pronounced. So just cut around the curved edge. You'll follow around the edge and then up the side and across the rod pocket area. And again, once you have hung this valance and checked it out, you can then always reposition your design form and take a little sliver off the side if you need to make sure that's nice and snug against the wall. Once your panel is cut out, remove your pins and it's time to make the rod hanging pocket. You can see here that my print is very straight across the bottom. If it were a little bit uneven, you could just cut along the bottom to straighten it out. So turn your panel with the lining side facing up. We're going to fold the rod pocket over. We want to make sure it meets the top edge of the lining without overlapping, and then just iron that down to hold it in place. So just iron across the top of the rod pocket folded area. Then you're going to cut a piece of fusible backing to fit inside of that area without overlapping onto the ironing board or onto the lining section. You want to make sure you can fold that pocket over and slip your rod through. So once you fuse that completely across the panel, wait for that to cool completely, to peel back and expose the glue. Then once the paper's removed, you will fold your rod pocket over. Make sure it's nice and tight because this is going to be a 1.5 inch pocket you want your rod to fit through. So, and you want it nice and straight. So pull it across, kind of taunt across the top of your lining. Take your time fusing your pocket down. You've got a couple of layers of fabric, so that might take a little while to get that secured. And then when you're ready to move on to your trim, just flatten that out underneath your iron to make sure that lays nice and straight. So pull out your reserved paper. I like to put the shiny side facing up when I am fusing because that way the glue does not stick to the paper or to your ironing board. In this case, for the center area, I recommend using tube glue or a glue gun because you don't want to apply heat on top of the fabric section. It'll cause it to buckle or loosen. So I just use the tube glue and just put a strip right across and then just position your one piece of trim. I have a 5/8 inch strip of braided gimp trim to go across my break in my fabric. Make sure it's nice and straight. With the tube glue, you can continue to reposition it a little bit until it dries. This is a fast drying, but you still have time to reposition your trim so that you get it perfectly straight. Very important. So once that's in place, then just snip off the edges so those are clean against the edge. Now we're going to hang this valance and look at the sizing before we do the edge trim. If you do need to remove anything from the sides, you can certainly do that prior to moving on to the trim. So for the edge trim, we're going to iron it on. You can use fusing tape, which the Ultra Hold Heat and Bond, or you can just cut your strips to fit the back of your trim. Just use the included backing to do that. Put the paper side up, glue side down, and just follow along your trim just really fast with the iron. It goes pretty quickly, fusing that backing to convert that into an iron-on trim. Again, this is a braided gimp trim, and we are going to put this along the edges. So once you remove the paper, then I'm folding it behind the back so that that's hidden, back of the pocket, and then just hold your iron on top of it. Make sure that your iron doesn't go over the top of your fabric. Keep just the edge over the trim. Don't overheat because it will cause the glue to deactivate. So you want to just follow along and keep going back and forth, checking it and pressing the iron down until that starts to fuse. Once you warm this trim up, it does start to curve around the edges. So you'll warm it up, curve around the edges, Then go back and press your iron, and then you can always move it with your finger to get it completely positioned perfectly after it starts to adhere a little bit. If for some reason you need to remove it, you just warm it up, pull it off, and stick it right back on. It's a really easy way to do your trim. So continue going around the whole entire edge, and then again around the other side. You'll secure your trim behind your panel. Once your trim has completely cooled, slip the curtain rod right in the no-sew pocket, and you're ready to hang your beautiful new dual fabric custom no-sew valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.